Welcome back to La Pausa. It's our twice-a-week podcast here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside pub. We're going to try and talk about some of the ongoing topics of conversation throughout the football world, the stuff that's not worth necessarily a full video on our YouTube channel. Make sure you check that out, the Pitchside pub. But I want to talk about some of these really interesting topics that just need a little bit of attention but don't need a whole video, get them to you in a more timely fashion, and just get some discussion going, particularly in the comments. You can follow this non-video podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere that you listen to podcasts, and of course we're going to put them up on the YouTube channel as well. Maybe put some clips on our Instagram channel, Pints and Punditry, and try to get this content out everywhere possible to try and discuss more and more topics outside of just on Twitter. And of course, if you don't already follow, go ahead and follow on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. So, lots of topics going on. AFCON is the big thing going on right now. And of course, the big news coming out of AFCON right now is the injury to Mo Salah. And, it's devastating to see because this is every team's worst nightmare, right? Is your star player. It's bad enough they're going to go off for a few weeks in the middle of the season. And that's a whole nother topic I'd like to discuss at another time, is how in the world this tournament continues to take place in the middle of the club season. It's an absolute travesty. The clubs that have their star players go off and play in this tournament are at such a disadvantage as opposed to clubs who don't have any big players going off, like Manchester City had nobody. It's such a disadvantage to some of these clubs to lose their guys for a couple games in the middle of the season. And then, of course, you've got the worst possible scenario where a player like Mo Salah gets hurt. He hurts his hamstring in the tournament, and now he's going to be out for a couple weeks. And Liverpool is fighting, tooth and nail to try and win the Premier League. And they're right there in the thick of things, sitting at the top of the league, but they know Manchester City's coming. They know Arsenal's right there. This is a very tight race this year, and the difference between winning and not winning could be a game or two. It could be a point. And Mo Salah is going to play a role in that, whether he's on the pitch or not. And that's the really devastating thing to see. Now, a lot of pundits are now immediately, the overreaction, the immediate overreaction that always takes place, right? There's always an immediate knee-jerk reaction, and it's, oh, well, there goes Liverpool's season, right? It's over. Everybody was already re-anointing Manchester City when Kevin De Bruyne came in and immediately had an impact and won them a game. And immediately just everyone wanted to write off Liverpool and Arsenal and everybody else and just crown Manchester City right there, which really discredits the battle that Manchester City has to fight to win the Premier League. It's not like they're running away with it. This is not the Bundesliga and Bayern Munich where they're winning by 8 and 10 points in some years. They did once, but it has been a battle. It's been a battle recently. They've had some come from behind victories throughout the course of this season. And right now, this season, if Manchester City goes off and wins the Premier League again, it will have been coming from well back in the pack. They were sitting in fourth not that long ago. And so it's really discrediting to the whole league to just anoint them because Kevin De Bruyne is back and Arsenal's fallen off the pace a little bit. And it discredits what Liverpool has done, which has been fantastic this year. The turnaround from Jurgen Klopp this year has been nothing short of incredible. For all the people that wanted to write him off last year and say he was done at Liverpool, done as a manager, there was the whole 7-year curse thing because this happened when he was at Dortmund and other places. It was lunacy at the time, and it looks even dumber now if you look back, and of course nobody's bringing it up now. But what he has done at Liverpool is nothing short of amazing, and they replenished that midfield, and yes, they brought in some additions, but as you can see at Chelsea and other places, that doesn't always solve things. So good coaching wins out. Jurgen Klopp is a fantastic coach. Do not discredit what they've done just because Mo Salah is not going to be around. Now, is losing him devastating for a few games? Absolutely. They're going to lose him for 5 or 6 games. I think 4 of them are likely to be Premier League matches. They've got a Carabao Cup game and an FA Cup game mixed in there as well. So they're going to lose him, and that could hurt. And if they draw one game that they could have won, there's 2 points that could make the difference. So I don't want to discount the injury to Mo Salah, but I also don't want to discredit everything they've achieved. But if you look at what they've got coming up, the games he's scheduled to miss, really only the Arsenal match is the one where it should have an impact. Liverpool is deep, and particularly on the attacking front. Nunez is coming on, Jota. I mean, they've got guys up there. They've got a lot of talent up front, and Luis Diaz and others. And so they do have adequate replacements. This isn't a club that's, like Newcastle, where they really didn't have enough depth, or where they, in their case, where they lost, like a dozen guys, right? This is a devastating blow, but they have the depth. So when you look at their upcoming schedule, Chelsea, Arsenal, Burnley, Brentford, Luton, those are the 5 Premier League games that he is likely to miss as they target a February 24th return date for Mo Salah. Chelsea, you never know because they have talent, but they're a mess. Burnley, Brentford, Luton, they should be able to handle no problem even without Mo Salah. So it's really that Arsenal matchup that is the one you sort of circle on the schedule and go, okay, is that where it's going to cost them? And if they draw that or lose it instead of winning, and then they lose the Premier League by 2 points, 1 point, it's going to be tough not to come back and circle that one and say, man, that AFCON tournament cost them a Premier League title. So I don't want to overstate it, but I also don't want to downplay it. They also need to not rush him back, because the real date that they should have circled on the calendar is March 9th against Manchester City, which is only, a week to 10 days, maybe 15, maybe 2 weeks after he comes back. So if they rush him back to face somebody like Luton or Brentford, which I'm sure they're smart enough not to do, he could end up hurting it more and then miss that Manchester City fixture. And you know how hamstrings can linger, and those can be a problem. So they have to be careful not to do that and not to rush him back too soon to the point where he's then going to miss out more time and potentially miss that game. So that's the one that they have to really earmark and make sure that he's back and available for. And not just back and available, but can play, 75, 80, 90, hopefully the whole game. But you got it when you compare him to Manchester City, and listen, this is devastating, and playing without your best player is tough. But Manchester City just did the same thing. They just played 18 straight Premier League games without Kevin De Bruyne, and it showed, and it hurt. But they're still in the thick of things. So these are the things you have to overcome. And when you are one of the top clubs, you have to have the depth to overcome it, because injuries do happen. And yes, it's more mentally devastating when it happens at another tournament for your country and not for the club. But, hey, it's going to happen either way, right? He could just as well have gotten hurt playing in a Carabao Cup game this week or anywhere else for Liverpool. So it hurts. It's a struggle, but it's part of the game. It does not write them off. They are definitely not done just because Mo Salah is hurt, and don't discount what they've done to get to this point and what they can do without him. Speaking of discounts, that's what Barcelona wants. You like that segue? Barcelona wants a discount for everything just because they are Barcelona. And the reason I'm bringing this up is super agent Jorge Mendes came out recently. It was talking about Joao Felix and Joao Cancelo, the 2 Joaos that they have on loan from various clubs, from Atletico Madrid and from Manchester City, respectively. And they want to keep them. And both players want to be there. And that all makes sense. And I did a video earlier in the year on Joao Felix. He got off to a really good start, and he's fallen off the pace a little bit, and he's fallen out of favor with Barcelona fans who don't realize how good they have it right now. And the fact that they're lucky to even have players of that caliber who still want to come play for them. These are players who fell out of favor at their own clubs and need a place to go. And because Barcelona still holds this aura around them from previous years, players are willing to go there. And Joao Cancelo was dying to go play in Barcelona anyway. Of course, you have to remember they are there on loan, right? And Barcelona can barely cover their wages right now, let alone go out and spend money on the transfer market. So you've got Jorge Mendes, who is a master manipulator of the media, putting out there rumors like, oh, Barcelona would like to keep them both permanently after this year is done. Well, yeah, of course they would, but they don't have any money. And that's the one common denominator I always come back to every time there's a rumor about a player to Barcelona. I just want to scream from the mountaintops, but you have no money. Right? They're sitting there talking about how they haven't gotten the payments for the financial levers that they pulled recently, and the parts of their media empire that they sold off, and the rights to future revenue. They haven't gotten paid for it, and even if they did, it was to pay off debts that they had and pay off transfer fees that they owe other clubs. Still, they have no money. So how exactly are they going to get these players back? Now, they could have them back on loans again next year, just repeat the same thing as this year, and that would be fine. But the parent clubs tend to want some sort of resolution to this. It's not really benefiting Manchester City to have Joao Cancelo on loan there, other than he's not pissing off everybody in the dressing room, he's not going to the media, and his salary's being covered. But it's not really a great benefit. They would love to sell him off, get $50 million for him or whatever it's going to be, and reinvest that in somebody else. So maybe they agree to another loan, but I don't see that happening really. Maybe with Joao Felix. But somebody's going to want Joao Cancelo. And the only way Barcelona's going to be able to make that happen is if they make some big sales. Frankie de Jong, they've been trying to sell him for about a year and a half now. He doesn't want to go, but they're trying. Rafinha is now sort of being replaced by some youngsters, and he's been hurt. He was a big signing from Leeds, or a big transfer from Leeds. They could sell him and recoup, a fair amount of money to pay for Joao Felix and Joao Cancelo. But what does that really accomplish? Rafinha, you're going to be selling for less than what you paid for him because you paid top dollar and now he's been hurt. So his value's diminished a little bit. So I don't know that really solves the problem, selling off some of their more valuable assets to bring in guys that they've already had on loan. So I don't really see this playing out that way no matter what Jorge Mendes says and no matter what Barcelona and their fans want. What it feels like is happening here is Jorge Mendes is doing what he does beautifully, which is controlling the narrative and manipulating the media, right? So he sends out the narrative that Barcelona is still interested in these, in getting them permanently, which I'm sure they are, but everybody forgets they don't have any money, or nobody wants to admit that they don't have any money, or maybe people don't realize how dire the financial situation is there. But as long as Jorge Mendes can keep Barcelona sort of interested, at least in the public perception, it raises the price for other clubs. So he probably knows damn well that Barcelona can't afford them, but as long as he keeps Barcelona interested, then the price from other clubs that he will get, and literally he will get it in his pocket because he gets a chunk of this, those fees will be higher and higher if Barcelona is involved. So this feels like a smokescreen to me. I don't quite buy it because I don't see where this money's coming from. And if they do manage to get the money, it's going to be by selling off other assets that to me then makes it not a step forward at best. It's a lateral move. Money is the driver here, right? Money's the driver for everything. Money, you have to have it to get things done. And that's what Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabian leagues realized this summer. It's not that they realized it, they knew it all along, but they decided it was time for a move. They went after all these big name players, and now we're starting to see some of them want to come back. We saw it with Jordan Henderson. He's now at Ajax. He gets to Saudi Arabia and goes, oh man, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Well, then you weren't listening to anybody because it's exactly what everybody told you it was going to be, right? No crowds, poor competition, your wife has no rights, but hey, here's a ton of money, hope you're happy, shut up and take it. And of course, he hasn't shut up since, which is his own problem. Now, we've got rumors that Karim Benzema might want out of Saudi Arabia as well. And part of the problem is he did not return on time from his winter break, his winter getaway. And apparently there were travel troubles. I don't know all the details. But regardless, he's now basically been put on the back burner by his club. And he said, well, forget it. I want out then. And there are, and that's reported. I don't know that he's come out and said that, but there are reports floating around that now Benzema might be available and he might be interested in leaving Saudi Arabia and coming back somewhere else in Europe. And you do have to wonder how much he really wanted to go to Saudi Arabia in the first place. He's not that far removed from winning a Ballon d'Or. It was clear Real Madrid wanted to move on. They were probably still hoping to get Erling Haaland or Kylian Mbappe at some point, and so they wanted to open up some of that playing time up front. They don't really have a striker. It was all very interesting. They were in the running for Harry Kane, but they had clearly decided, okay, we're going to move on from Benzema. For some reason, nobody else really wanted him, or we couldn't find a fit. He ends up in Saudi Arabia. It seemed like a safety net. He didn't really want to be there, and now he wants to come back. So the question is, where does he end up? To me, and the strongest rumors are coming from Lyon, which is his former club that he grew up in and played in as a youngster, as a teenager, before he went to Real Madrid for a decade. I do personally like seeing those sort of reunion tours, the destinations. Okay, I'm going to go back to my boyhood club or the club I made my debut with, and spend some time with them in the twilight of my career. Hey, I'd rather that than Saudi Arabia. At least we could watch him play. But it's really interesting to see how this is going to happen. I don't know the French tax laws. I know if he comes to England, he's got to pay back a ton of. Well, maybe he wouldn't if he wasn't English. That would apply to Jordan Henderson. Maybe he doesn't have to because he's not English. So The rules are different. There's so many financial implications here. Arsenal has been linked to him as they try to improve their striker situation. It would obviously be short term. Maybe it's even a loan. But it's all very interesting to see that these guys are going to Saudi Arabia and they're not loving it. They're not loving it the way they thought they would. The money is not the end all be all. And it's so important for players, young and old. The guys going to Saudi Arabia are in the twilight of their careers. But younger players make this same mistake too. They chase the money or they chase the glory, or in young players' cases, a lot of times they chase a big club and glorious opportunity, and they overextend and they're not going to get a chance to play. And I talk about that a lot. In this case, it's the other way around. They're avoiding the glory for the sake of money. Then they get there and go, oh man, playing in front of 7,000 people in 120-degree heat sucks. This is no fun. Oh, and by the way, everyone's forgotten about me because my games aren't on TV and I'm not relevant anymore and I can't play in the Champions League. This isn't any fun anymore. I don't care how much money I'm making. I want to go back. So I can't say I'm shocked that this is how any of it played out. Sort of played out exactly the way everyone thought it would. And now these guys are coming back with their tail between their legs. But in Benzema's case, I do hope he finds a soft landing spot. I didn't have a lot of sympathy for Jordan Henderson, but I have a little bit more for Karim Benzema. I don't know why. It just feels like he was less betraying people and that he only went there because there didn't seem to be a lot of other interest in him, whereas Jordan Henderson would have had a dozen options had he actually pursued them. Those are some of the big stories for today. I also want to do, when I do this podcast, we're going to try and do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I want to hit some smaller news and notes type stories, and I tweet about some of these things, but just some interesting stuff that I see come across the radar that I just don't understand. This is the part where I'm going to act confused and look for answers. And if you've got explanations for this, please get in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. Comment on the YouTube videos. I'd love to understand this stuff more because I don't think I'm missing anything, but some of this stuff just seems so obvious. The first story. There's some reports out, there's some stories out that, and the headlines read, Alphonso Davies under scrutiny at Bayern Munich. Well, there's a lot that goes into that. First of all, the scrutiny is much higher at Bayern Munich because they're not winning the Bundesliga right now. And they just lost to Werder Bremen over the weekend. Thomas Tuchel is reaching that point in every stop where he pisses everybody off. He's almost at that year mark, which means he's inside a year from getting fired because he's alienated the media and everybody in the dressing room, and everybody dislikes him because he's a generally unlikable guy. We've seen this at every stop he's been at recently for the past half a decade, and if you follow me, I predicted this as he was getting hired by Bayern Munich last year. The reason Alphonso Davies is the target right now is because he got beat defensively against Werder Bremen and gave up a goal when he probably shouldn't have, and there have been some comments from other coaches. Erik ten Hag called him out in the media as being not a very good defender. That was a thing ten Hag shouldn't have done, but he did it anyway. Davies is not a particularly great defender. But the thing we forget, and this is the part I don't understand, is how everyone has forgotten that he's not really a fullback. Right? Alphonso Davies is not a fullback. He's a winger masquerading as a fullback because a few coaches ago at Bayern, they wanted to play more attacking style and use fullbacks more as aggressive, overlapping wingbacks. And he can do that, but when you do that and you repurpose a winger, or at best a forward-playing midfielder, and you repurpose him as a fullback, you've got to accept the defensive sacrifices that you're making. And that's a fine strategy. I'm not saying he shouldn't have played at fullback all this time, but there's a reason he doesn't play fullback for Canada. There's a reason he wasn't really playing fullback for Vancouver, and he had double-digit goals and assists. He was a huge part of their offense. He wasn't meant to be a defender. He never said he was a defender. He wasn't really a fullback until he got to Bayern. I mean, he played a little bit in it, but he's used as a winger in his home country, and that should tell you something. It's like he's played fullback for so long for Bayern, now he's going on his third, fourth, fifth season, something like that, that we've just forgotten that he's not really a fullback. The same thing happened with Alexander Zinchenko a couple weeks ago at Arsenal. He had a few bad games. He hasn't been playing all that well, and particularly defensively. He gets torched by Mo Salah. He can't keep up with him because he doesn't quite have the pace to play as a fullback with the really pacey attacking wingers. And we used to see this at Manchester City as well. He would get torched by Vinicius out on the wing in the Champions League, and there were some other instances. He's not really built to do it. You know why? Because he's a freaking midfielder. That's why. Right? When he plays for Ukraine, he plays as like a number 8. He plays in a much more forward position. He's an attacking midfielder by trade. Now, he got shifted to fullback by Pep because Pep likes to have midfielders at every single position, but that's how he ended up there, and then Arteta has a similar philosophy, and they signed him for a bunch, and now he's playing there. It's the same thing with Davies. He's not really a fullback. So you can't be shocked when he gets beat defensively, and there's been commentary about him tracking back and the amount of effort he puts into defense. Well, you want him flying forward. He's got some of the best pace in the damn world, and you got him flying forward on offense. He's basically just running wind sprints the whole damn game. What do you expect to happen here? It's all about expectations. And the expectations of what Alphonso Davies are wrong. He's not a pure defender. He's not a world-class fullback in terms of being a well-rounded fullback who can contribute on offense and on defense. And maybe they had hoped that he would learn and improve defensively during this time, but he simply hasn't. And I don't think anybody should be shocked by this, right? There's a reason when he plays for Canada, they play typically a 3 in the back, and he's either a wing back or he's a wide midfielder. They play some 4-4-2 or 4-4-1-1, and he plays in front of the back line. He is not a part of their back line. That's not an accident, right? So Bayern, you sort of are getting what you paid for. You're getting what we all thought he was. Don't forget that he's not a good defender just because you've been playing him at fullback for all these years. That's not his fault. Gets me fired up. Brighton played a scoreless draw against Wolves the other day, and Brighton. I get in trouble for this every time. Brighton fans come at me. I don't care. I believe this in my core. Brighton has been one dynamic attacking player away all season, and that's why they sit just off the pace of the European spots. And listen, what Brighton has accomplished is phenomenal. It's amazing. I'm not knocking it. Their corporate structure should be modeled by every mid-table team in Europe. And the way they do business, the way they identify talent, the way they get it in young, they develop it, they sell it. I even posted on Twitter the other day that if you're a young player, you'd so much rather be at Brighton than Manchester United right now for your future. Because it's a better place to develop with lower expectations and, frankly, a better coach. But if they ever want to get better than what they are, which is finishing in that 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th range. And they're at a point where they can hit that consistently now. As long as they've got Roberto De Zerbi and they keep bringing in some new talent every year and he develops them properly, they'll be on that fringe of European football every year. But at some point, you want to be a little bit better than that, right? And Brighton fans basically tell me, no, we don't. We're happy with this because of where we've been. And we've been so low that we're just happy to be here. Everybody's just happy to be here. I'm sorry, it's pathetic. I'm not saying go be Manchester City and spend a ton of money, or Newcastle and now go up against FFP regulations, or what Nottingham Forest did when they got to the Premier League and they just spent wildly. No. But you've sold so many players. You have so much money in your pocket right now. And yes, it's being reinvested in facilities and upgrades and all this stuff. Wonderful. But a guy like Mohamed Kudus was out there, and he wouldn't have helped in this game because he's over in the AFCON tournament too playing for Ghana. But at some point in the past few months, a player like him, who they were linked with and they had agreed to terms with Ajax, but couldn't agree to personal terms because he wanted a release clause, and I think he was gonna mess up their wage scale. He wanted to be pretty well paid, and rightly so. And he goes to West Ham instead, and look at where they're competing in the table. Look at who they're competing with. And a player like Kudus, and there are others, it doesn't have to be him. I bring him up as the example because they were linked with him and they had worked out the deal with Ajax, and then it fell through because they were so rigid in their spending that it's going to cost them. It's going to cost them. That is the difference between 6th and 7th, or 5th and 8th maybe even, and being in Europe again somewhere next year versus being on the outside looking in. And it's evident when they have a scoreless draw against Wolves, who they outplayed. They outplayed Wolves. They dominated possession. They had their chances. You're one dynamic offensive player short. Could have been a striker. Could have been a winger. Could be an attacking midfielder. It doesn't have to be Mohamed Kudus. He's just the example I use because they were linked so directly with him. And he was there for the taking. He was there. This is not hypothetical. This is not me playing Football Manager. It was there. It was agreed to, and you just wouldn't budge. And you know what? That's why you're going to end up in 8th place. And I don't feel bad at that point because you had the money, you still have the money, and you didn't do it. Speaking of money, there is a rumor that the MLS outgoing sale record, that's not the right term, but the transfer fee might be broken for Talles Magno, who's a 21-year-old winger who plays for New York City FC. And he's been linked with Bologna. And Magno's a really dynamic player. He's Brazilian, he's young, he's been playing for NYCFC pretty regularly the past couple years. 2 years ago, he was very involved in their offense, scored a bunch of goals, had a lot of assists, tons of goal creation. Last year, he fell off a little bit. And so his value, his transfer market value, if that's the metric you want to use, has fluctuated between 7 and 15 million dollars, depending on how he's been doing lately. There's a lot of fluctuation there, so you got to take this with a grain of salt. Bologna is rumored to be linked with him, and it'd be a great move for Magno because they're sort of a mid-table Italian team where he could develop and play and doesn't have to be the focal point of the offense, which is part of the problem he had for NYCFC last year, is he's not quite ready for that yet, so he could go and have some talent around him and do quite well there. New York City wants $20 million for him. That would be a record. He's probably more like 12 to 15. That would still be up there. The reason I bring it up is because people make a big deal out of things like new records, right? Oh, is he really worth being the highest transfer sale ever in MLS history? Well, no, probably not based on talent alone, but let's factor in things like inflation and things like just the rise in transfer sales across the world. And the fact that the value of all these players is going up. The value of MLS is going up thanks to Lionel Messi and some TV contracts and things like that. So it's not apples to apples. You have to compare it to the market as a whole. A player like Magno going for, let's say it is $15 million, seems about right. It just goes to show you how little MLS has had in really valuable young players over the years, and that this is not where they make their mark, selling off these young players. But they could, if they got more young, dynamic Brazilian players. It doesn't have to be from Brazil, it could be from other places, but players like this they could sell for more profits. Of course, it's the City Group that's doing it. They run a fantastic business. But I just find it interesting that he could set a record. They could set a record with this sale. And you look at it and you go, it's Talles Magno, really? And I don't mean to knock him. I think he's a fabulous young player who should do well at Bologna if that's where he ends up or wherever he ends up. But you have to keep perspective on the totals, on the amounts, on these numbers. You see these big numbers, and they just have such an impact, but they have to have perspective. So I'm interested to see how that one turns out. Not really a lot of news there yet, but I think it's interesting when you start comparing to previous records, especially in MLS, you got to compare apples to apples to make sure you're having the right perspective. Anyway, those are some of the news and notes that I came across in the last 24 hours that I thought are interesting to talk about. Get in that comment section if you're watching on YouTube or on the podcast networks. Follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. I'd love to get your feedback there. Let me know that you heard it on the podcast and you want to talk about it. I'll post a few things as well. We're going to try and do this podcast every Tuesday and Thursday, time permitting. It'll give me a chance to talk about some of these topics. You can see some of them get me fired up, some I just find interesting, but I'd love to get the discussion going. That's the entire point of the Pitchside Pub. We want to take the classic sports pub debate, the football pub debate, and bring it online to you on a whole bunch of different platforms, on a whole bunch of different channels. So make sure you check us out. Follow us on Instagram at Pints and Punditry, on YouTube at Pitchside Pub, on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. Make sure you hit the subscribe button for me while you're at it for the podcast, wherever it is you're listening. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.